Okay, so I've been wanting to make a video about making sourdough bread with fresh milled flour, and it was really hard to find a recipe that actually turned out to where the sandwich bread was pliable and you could fold it for a sandwich and it wouldn't tear or crumble. And so I was messaging a friend of mine and we were sharing recipes, and she shared one that she developed, and I tried it and it was perfect. So today I just want to make a video of start to finish, starting with feeding your starter, grinding the wheat berries, and then I'll continue with making the bread dough, and I also make it into rolls at the same time, and then baking it in the finished product. So I'm gonna start with, I use a mock mill. This is the, let's see, which one is this? This is a 200. And so I use hard white wheat, hard red wheat, and spelt grains for my fresh milled flour. Normally I separate the different grains, but for today I'm just gonna keep it however it's mixed, because I kind of do a different variety when I feed my starter anyways. And I also have an einkorn starter here that I use mainly for pizza dough or Wednesday night pizzas, and that's this one. But I could also get the berries and grind them, but I've just been buying that for now. Okay, so with my starter, I'm very laid back. I don't measure and weigh like I did in the beginning, so I usually keep about this much, maybe 1/4 to 1/2 cup of starter in my jar. And this is the one I just got from Azure. This is what I feed my whole grain flour, my fresh milled flour. So I just dump as much water as I have starter in there already, approximately. I'm going more for texture. Works for me. There's all kind of videos if you want to get technical and do things other ways, but I like easy, so. So I mix the water in there with that and then add my flour. And I usually keep my starter fed depends how much I'm baking, but I do bread probably about every other day, every 2 days. So if I'm not gonna be using it, I just stick it in the fridge and then feed it before I need to use it. So I'll get this, make sure it's nice and active and bubbly. Usually in the morning that I'm gonna make my bread dough, and I'll do my bread dough at night. And then the next morning, I'll shape it and let it rise, and then bake my bread and rolls. And you want to make sure you have room for it to rise, for room for it to double is what I like to leave in there. So this is the consistency I have for this fresh milk one. So right now I'm getting my wheat berries from Azure standard. You can look on the website for the closest drop to you. Ours is Smithville right now. Kind of like a pancake batter. And then I kind of just go where I can find the good prices and I know it's good quality ingredients. So like this, I've been finding a good price at vitacost.com. And they always have a coupon, so if you're gonna order from Vitacost, never order without a coupon code. They always have one from like 12 to 20% off, always. Okay, so that is the first step, is feeding the starter. And I will just let these guys sit on the counter. And get nice and bubbly. I'm usually not this messy. It happens to be when I'm on video, of course. It's also usually never quiet in here. I sent the kids outside for a little bit so I could try to make a video. Okay, so those are good to go. And I'll clean this up and I'll continue it once I have my starters ready, which will just be this one for the bread. And this one is for my pizza. My fresh milled starter is ready here. You see all the bubbles in it, so it's nice and active. I bought this sourdough starter from Azure Standard. It's whole wheat, and I've also made my own with just flour and water, and you leave it on the counter and do the feeding and discarding. This is a sandwich bread recipe from my friend, and I will link to her page. I get all my ingredients out, and I start with hot water, and I put it in a measuring cup, and then I cool it down with room temperature water, and I just do the finger touch test to make sure that it's warm but not hot so it doesn't kill the sourdough. If I'm going to be using milk like the recipe calls for, then I will make it a little bit hotter because the cold milk is going to cool it down, so I like it to be warm when it's all mixed together. I have made it without milk too, and so it's just a matter if you want to use milk or if you have it on hand. It turns out pretty much the same, in my opinion. Then add the sourdough starter in, the oil. I sometimes would do half oil and half butter just for texture and flavor. I just like to experiment with things. Salt and sugar. Always use real salt or sea salt, not the table salt. No one should be using table salt in my opinion. For health benefits, you really want to use the other stuff. You don't have to use sugar. I've made it without sugar. You can experiment with using a different sweetener or leave it out altogether and see if you like the way it turns out. Then I add in some flour, not all of it at once, that way I can get it just kind of mixed together. And then I also like to add in the vital wheat gluten, or it's also called gluten flour. I like to add that in before it's all mixed together. So you'll see me adding it here in a second with the rest of the flour. And since this recipe goes by measurements with cups, it's not by weight on a scale. So you kind of have to watch at the end when you're adding in your flour and see how your dough is, if it's wet and sticky still or if it's too dry. And then the gluten flour, or the vital wheat gluten, that's going to help with your structure of the bread. It's going to help it stay bendable and moldable and not tear and crumble. It's just going to give it that strength. This is the only recipe I found and tried that uses all fresh milled flour and not half store flour, because the texture does turn out different when you're using completely fresh milled flour. That's also why I think that the gluten flour, or the vital wheat gluten, works with this recipe to give it that sandwich bread texture, and so it doesn't crumble and fall apart. You can actually bend it and fold it. You can see my mixer having some trouble here because I doubled it. If I do a single batch, it's not an issue, but I just like being able to make twice as much, a loaf of bread and rolls, or 2 loaves of bread at once. So sometimes I'll just go through this and just baby it until I get it all mixed up. Then I just pat it down in my bowl and cover it, and that way I can see what measurement line it's at, so I can see how high it rises if it doubles. Okay, so it is the next morning. I made my bread dough last night, and so now the next morning before we leave for a little bit, I'm going to get my dough shaped, a loaf and rolls. That's what I've been liking to do because the rolls are just quick, everybody can just grab one quick and snack on it. And then the bread we can use for sandwiches and toasts. So, not sure if it's quite doubled, but it's to the top. Ooh, to the top bowl here. And so, so the last time I made this, one thing about this recipe, which I love how it turns out, but it is by measurements. It's by cups, I should say, and not by weight. And so the last time I made this, it turned out a little bit too wet and it didn't get quite the rise I wanted, but this time I might have erred on the side of a little bit too much flour. So we'll see how that turned out here. But otherwise, it's gonna be perfect. It feels pretty good. You know, a lot of times it's not, I'm sure any baker knows, it's not about the measurements, it's about how your dough is, how it looks and feels, all that good stuff. Also, a thing about doing a double batch, like I've been doing, is it's a little harder to mix in my bowl. Just a single batch is way easier to mix up. A double batch, it gets kind of full and tough. So I just divide my dough in half to start, because one will be a loaf and one will be rolls. So my dough feels really good. It's not too sticky. I can work with it, so I don't need to flour or oil my surface. So I'm just gonna first, this is what I do. This might make some people cringe, but I wash my hands first. I just take some butter on my hand here, my fingers, and I butter my pans. This 9x13 glass pan will be for my rolls. So I used to make homemade bread with just, you know, organic, unbleached, all-purpose flour or bread flour with yeast, and the kids loved how it turned out, except for one of my kids and myself kind of had a reaction, like would get itchy, you know, from the yeast, to get like breakouts or whatever. It just didn't sit well with us. But then once I started milling my grain fresh, reading all the health benefits of that, and also it stores longer, just the wheat berries, and then you grind it fresh when you need it. And just the amazing flavor of sourdough and the whole grain fresh milled wheat. Like, it's hard to eat the other stuff now. I know how good that is. Okay, so I just kind of make, I'm sure there's a ton of ways to do this. This is just what I do. So I just kind of push it out into a rectangle-ish. Nothing too fancy, because it seems like, you know, there's all these great techniques to do things, but mine always seems to turn out, so I don't take the extra steps and whatever when it turns out. Okay, so let me just back up. I put it in a rectangle, and then I fold in both sides to the middle, and then I just start rolling it up, and I keep it tight, and I pull it back. Every time I roll it, I kind of pull it back, and also at the same time I'm tucking my fingers in, tucking it in with my fingers. Yeah, it does feel a little, this dough feels a little dry, like a little too much flour, so next time I just need to watch it more carefully. I think with the rush of making the video and everything, which isn't my normal routine, is videoing things, so it takes a little bit longer. I wasn't paying enough attention to this, so okay. Once I have it rolled, then I just, I'll pinch this a little bit. If it was more of a wet dough, it would stick easier, but since it's dry, it's kind of pulling apart. And then you just pull it against the counter to kind of make that seal better. And like I said, it turns out for me. I'm not gonna fuss with it too much. Okay, so we will see how that does in the loaf pan. And then, so for this, I like to do 15 rolls, so it's not an even number, but, and I know it's more accurate to weigh out each roll, but like I said, I just don't take time for all that stuff. I'm usually kind of in a hurry with lots to do, places to go, schooling to get done with the kids, you know, whatever it may be. Okay, 4, and then I'm going to do that in half again. And then what I do is I take so that makes 16 if I keep having it, but then I take my 2 smallest ones and make 1 out of it to make it 15 to fit nicely in my pan. I'm just eyeballing these, and the ones that are a little bit smaller or larger, they kind of bake the same. Like, okay, so. These are my 2 smallest ones. And if it's like too big, I'll pull like a little bit off and give it to another one, but that's good enough for me. All right, then I just give it a quick roll, and the consistency of the dough makes it easier to do this. When I tried this the other day, I might drop a clip of it, I don't know. It was just a little too sticky and it wouldn't really roll out right. And I'm also not very good left-handed, so even though I get it started with my left hand, I have to give it to my right hand to finish the job. So, yeah. So I will just roll these out. It's like doing that thing where you like, what is it? Pat your head and tummy at the same time, or no, do a circle and tummy, pat your head at the same time. Like, I can't do that. Coordination has never been my strong suit, so. I also sent the kids outside because they were way too loud for me to even hear myself think. So much less do a video. I was like, go outside and play a little bit before we go to the park for homeschool day. And I'll get this video made real quick. They're already at the door. Okay. So we're gonna be going to the park in a little bit, so this will have a couple hours to rise, and then we'll come home and bake it and be ready for a nice snack. Nice hot rolls, or I do let the bread cool. What's up, Eli? He's like, no, don't say my name. Man, this is a good arm workout too. We've been doing the Bowflex. As a family, we've all been taking turns doing that to try to get in better shape and build some muscle. And oh, this is the muscle I haven't worked out right here. That's what I'm feeling that one right now. Eli, why don't you make sure everybody's ready to go and the water bottles are filled, okay? And let the animals out. That one was good enough with my left, I think. And I think I'm not making these as well as I normally do, just because I am in a little bit of a rush, and so it's like, if you're in a rush, why make a video? Well, it's not every day that I get up and put going places clothes on and put makeup on and do my hair, you know. When I do, the kids say, where are we going? So I wanted to take the opportunity to make the video quick. Also, it's like never a good time. It's always something going on, so you just have to make a point to do it. Okay. Some of those are pulling apart just because the dough isn't quite wet enough. Okay. This one. I don't think I even needed this dough quite as long as I was supposed to, because it was really late last night and I think we were needing to go to bed or something. So I probably had this dough ready around 9 o'clock. I'll have to check the timestamp on the video, and it wasn't ready this morning at 7, so it's about 9:30 now. And I would say it's ready enough. Okay. We'll see how these turn out and see if this is a good enough job or not. I'm sure it'll still be delicious though, even if it's not that pretty. The whole point of this video was that my friend sent me a recipe that she just developed. We were both looking for a recipe for sourdough bread with the fresh milled flour, because other recipes use like half fresh milled, half store flour or whatever, which, you know, the whole purpose of me getting this was so I could stop buying store flour. Well, not the whole purpose, that's the main thing. The health benefits. The health benefits were the main reason. Okay, we're gonna call that good, just because we need to get going, and I'm sure it'll be just fine. So I will cover these now. Not that pretty, but. And then once this loaf rises, I'll score it on top, just to give it a little more chance to rise. That's something that I've learned you need to do with fresh milled flour. Okay, and I'm gonna stick this in the oven with the light on because it's a little chilly today, so the house isn't that warm. So I'm just gonna have this in the oven while we go. Let's see, light on. So it's been about 3 hours and this is risen, the bread is ready. So I'm just taking it all out of the oven so I can go ahead and get it preheated. You'll see my cast iron pans in there that I use for pizza, but I leave those in there. I don't take them out when I bake things. So I'm going to preheat to 350 and then I bake it for 40 to 45 minutes. Lately I've been doing 45 minutes. Okay, here I'm going to take the saran wrap off and go ahead and score the top of it. Like I mentioned earlier, with the fresh milled, I find that scoring it on top just helps it rise more in the oven, and you don't have to do it. Sometimes I don't do it, but I like the way it turns out. Sourdough does take a lot longer to rise than if you're using yeast. If you're using sourdough and yeast, you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get that great flavor and the health benefits, and then the yeast will help it rise faster. I do have a sandwich bread recipe we use with that sometimes. But I do believe that longer rise time and fermentation of just sourdough and no commercial yeast is healthier. And the rise time is determined by the temperature, so if it's cooler, then it'll take longer. I dump my bread out of the pan so it can cool down without getting soggy. Then while it's still hot, I like to slather some butter on it. Sometimes I use this pastry brush, sometimes I just grab a stick and wipe it on like that. But it just gives it a nice little shine and it tastes really good. Butter is good on everything. So I just want to pull one of these rolls out to show you. It's still hot, but just to show you how it turns out. It's got a nice chewy texture. Now you are supposed to let your bread cool down all the way before you slice it, so that's what I did here. However, if you can't wait, I totally understand, because there's nothing like a hot piece of bread with butter on it. It's just so good. So if you have to do that, cut it off the end and leave the rest of the loaf till it cools. So I recorded this a little while later, but I never made the video, so I was able to add it in here. This is a good example of what your dough should look like. It's not too dry, not too wet. It doesn't stick to the bowl, but it doesn't, it's not too hard to mix. It comes together nicely, and so you just want to mix it until it's a good elasticity texture. I wanted to mention why I use different varieties of wheat berries. The hard red wheat gives it such a good flavor, and the hard white wheat would be considered your bread flour. If you buy soft white, that's more of like an all-purpose, what you would use for baking cookies or pancakes, things like that. I like to add in spelts, or I have different varieties that I'll add in sometimes just to experiment with the flavor. I've made it with just hard white wheat. It was still good, but it wasn't as delicious as when I have the red wheat in there. So a lot of times I'll just do half red and half white. So when I do double my bread dough, I like to split it in half and do one loaf of bread, and then I make rolls. And I also started making my bread dough without the sugar, and we can't tell a difference at all, so I've been making it like that now to not have any added sugar. And I also made it one time without, I didn't have any milk left. We needed to go to the dairy, and so I just added water for that portion, and it turned out just fine as well. So when I do my bread, I just kind of just do a rough rectangle. I saw this on some kind of bread video a while back, and I've just always done it this way. And then I fold it into thirds, and then I tightly roll it up, tucking in the sides and everything at one time. And you can tell that the dough is the right consistency. This is how I'm used to having it anyway, where it's just a little tacky, but it doesn't stick to your table or your hands or anything. And then once you get to the end, I tuck the sides under on this side a little bit. Tuck the sides under, and then the seam here, I just pull it against the table just to kind of seal that seam. And just do that several times. the tension with the surface. And then I put it in my loaf pan. And I cover it and I stick it in the oven with the oven light on until the top of it is above the sides of the pan. Okay, and then for my rolls, I take my other half of the doubled dough and I divide it up into 16 pieces. So I divide my dough up into, I keep splitting in half until I get 16 pieces. But with my 9x13 pan here, I like to do 3x5. So I take my smallest roll out of the 16 and I just split it up and add it to the ones that are a little bit smaller because I don't take the time to weigh each one out, which would be more accurate. I just usually don't spend that much time doing this. So I have 8, so I'm gonna split these all in half. And doing it this way it never turns out bad. It's always like close enough. And so this one is my smallest, I can tell already. Hold it more over here so you can not get this shadow. Come over here. Come over here. Hold it, see how you see it better now? It's not the shadow. So this is my smallest one. So I'm just, well, I could start rolling these out already, but I'm just gonna divide this one up into like my smaller ones. And then I just start rolling it in a circle here. And just the tension with the surface again, and makes it a nice ball. In case I didn't mention it, the rise time can vary from 2 hours to 10 hours depending on the temperature, like if you have it in the fridge or in the oven on proof or with the light on or just on the counter. You making a roll, Clemmy? Mm-hmm. Okay, roll it.
Mom, I put that on my roll.
Okay, make it into a ball.
Mm-hmm.
Good roll making. We're taking out the last of these wheat berries at the bottom of the bucket so we can add in our new bags. We'll use the stuff in the jar first. So we have hard red wheat, soft white wheat, and they only had sprouted wheat berries, which was more expensive, but I really needed that hard white. So got our empty buckets here ready to fill. Okay, so a little bit about why I buy the wheat berries. First of all, I can store them in these airtight buckets with a Gamma Seal lid, and I have a whole bulk order here. I don't have to run to the store every so often. And then also for the nutrition, when you buy the wheat berries, there's 3 parts to it. You have the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. Well, when they're processing it to put in the store to make it last a long time, they take out the bran, which is loaded with fiber and nutrients, the germ, which has vitamins, protein, minerals, and oil, and you're just left with the endosperm, which is part of the wheat berry that's simply loaded with a lot of starch. So if you want to have all the benefits of the whole wheat berry, then it's good to buy your berries and mill them fresh. And I've read that the wheat berries, if stored properly, can last up to 20 years or more. So definitely give fresh milled flour a try and sourdough for sure.